Boxing, a big feature of the Olympics for many years, but would you believe a sport that actually began in Iraq? Now, Tony Olivero, a sports reporter from the Wall Street Journal, here is to talk about this. It turns out that, like many sports, the Iraqis aren't so good at winning medals in boxing, and you've gone through a series of sports, in fact, where the countries that are named as those that invented these sports seem to be persistently bad as it comes to performing them in the modern Olympics. What's the story with Iraq then? What first of all, the history behind it?
Right. Well, we went through with all the different sports and disciplines and events kind of at the Olympics, and we went through and logically kind of denoted the countries that claimed these sports with various different variables for each sport. So Iraq was the one who took boxing due to relief carvings found, years ago. That depicted the sport almost in its identical state, and there's been almost 900 medals given out in boxing over the course of history.
And you can see the numbers there, zero, it turns out.
Zero for the Iraqis.
The Iraqis. Yeah. I mean, but we're talking about like the Sumerian carvings from 3,000 years ago. I think it's quite a long stretch, really, between now and the modern day Iraq. But nonetheless, that is where it all began. Some other ones as well, right? Archery in Egypt. What's the history behind that?
Well, in Egypt, there's archery and also a sport like fencing, where there's, again, depictions of these sports being played almost in their identical states as modern day. Fencing is one where they had soft tips on these actual fencing swords as well as protective headpieces and masks.
Quite the predecessor, yeah.
So these countries can be linked to these sports, and for people from those countries, it's worth noting that you can claim, and you probably should claim these sports, but you've never medaled in these sports.
And there's one I didn't know, soccer, China. I had always thought soccer was a British sport, but in fact it actually began in China.
Right. Well, again, it's with some of these, we took sports where the predecessor of those sports, also Mongolia was another example, where they played almost an identical version of a sport that was well ahead of its time, well ahead of soccer being kind of competitively kind of organized in those countries. So again, these more ancient ones are some good examples, but there are also some more modern ones like table tennis in Britain or trampolining in the United States, where they have never won a medal, and these are direct lineages to these sports.
It's interesting. I was thinking these are ones, as you say, the US has not done very well at, but you wonder whether some of the sports that America, of course, is extremely good at, American football, for example, if it would become an Olympic sport, suddenly you'd lose their capacity to do so. I was just reading this fascinating article of yours. In fact, I looked up and to find out where basketball was invented, and it turns out it was invented by a Canadian some time ago. So and Canada doesn't strike me as having a great basketball team either. What about some of these other ones? Water polo, Great Britain. How did that begin? And I suppose they've got 3 medals isn't too bad. But
water polo is again one that's more competitive, more organized. Great Britain, they have kind of a lineage of. I was actually talking about this with one of my colleagues today. For gambling purposes, back kind of a few centuries ago, they decided to kind of organize these sports for competitive purposes, just for the sake of gambling on them. So they get a lot of these kind of birth country rights. But again, the one thing that I think struck me the most in this research, and perhaps struck the readers as well, is a lot of these modern countries. Like, for example, this guy Paul Drinkhall, a table tennis player from Britain, who actually bowed out today in the 4th round. He was a big deal over in Britain these last few days because they've never won a table tennis medal, and that's a sport that was kind of conceived for the British aristocracy centuries ago.
What was the name?
They called it whiff-waff back in the day. So it's almost a
But there's also a sort of seems to be a British trope. I mean, the way that they can never win Wimbledon, the way that their rugby team is pretty useless, and so forth, right? But what is there? Is there a thesis you have as to why the countries that began these sports end up being so useless at them?
Well, I think the sport in general is something where once every country gets at it and once it becomes popular, there are many different variables that go into why a country might be good at sport. You take table tennis, for example, completely dominated by China, and it's something that kind of just caught on in that country. Again, with a lot of these British sports, when Britain, back when they had their empire, these sports spread out, and certain colonies really performed better.
They took advantage of it.
You look at
I'm an Aussie, and we certainly learned how to play cricket better than
Exactly,
English.
swimming
But there are some that have done okay, right? Just to quickly finish up here, Greece and France have done quite well.
Right.
With in the first case gymnastics, in the latter case tennis, right?
Right. Well, you look at something like Greece. They invented, they can claim, I think it's like 8 or 9 modern Olympic sports from the ancient games, and they've managed to medal in each one of those. Freestyle wrestling is one where I think they've only won 1 or 2 medals in history, and there's many freestyle medals given out every year. So Greece might not want to be too proud of that.
Yeah.
But something like discus, they've really managed to
perform
well.
Yeah. Well, that goes all the way back, of course.